The stagecoach rattled over the rough terrain, dust swirling around it like an anxious cloud. Inside, Katerina Petrova clutched her worn leather journal to her chest, its pages filled with memories of her homeland and hopes for her new life. Little did she know that the man who had arranged for her passage across an ocean and a continent would reject her the moment he heard her accent. But sometimes, fate has different plans, especially in the wide-open spaces of Montana territory, where a neighboring rancher with worldly experience would see her differences not as flaws to be hidden, but as treasures to be celebrated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The year was 1885, and the young stagecoach lurched violently as it navigated the final miles of rugged terrain towards Silver Creek, Montana territory. Katerina Petrova braced herself against the leather seat, one hand gripping the wooden frame of the window, the other clutching her most precious possession, a leather-bound journal filled with recipes, folk remedies, and stories from her Czech homeland. "Not much longer now, miss," the driver called from above, his voice barely audible over the creak of wood and the jangling of harnesses. "Silver Creek's just beyond that ridge." Katerina nodded, though the driver couldn't see her. After weeks of travel, first the steamship across the Atlantic, then the train westward, and finally this bone-jarring stagecoach, she was ready for the journey to end. 23 days since she'd left her small village outside Prague, each mile carrying her further from everything familiar and closer to a new life with a man she knew only through carefully worded letters. She smoothed down her best dress, midnight, blue with delicate embroidery around the collar, work she had done herself in the traditional style of her region. The small mirror in her handbag reflected a young woman of 24, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of walnuts. Pretty enough, she had been told, though not a classic beauty. Her mother had always said her true beauty lay in her hands, skilled at cooking, sewing, and the folk art of her people. "Silver Creek," the driver announced as they crested the hill. Katerina leaned toward the window, taking in her first glimpse of what would be her new home. The settlement was smaller than she had imagined. A cluster of wooden buildings stretched along a single main street, surrounded by rolling grasslands that seemed to extend forever. In the distance, purple mountains rose against the impossibly wide sky, nothing like the close, familiar landscape of Bohemia with its ancient forests and villages nestled in valleys. Despite her exhaustion, excitement fluttered in her chest. After her parents' deaths from typhus 2 years earlier, she had faced limited prospects in her village. The advertisement in the international matrimonial newsletter had seemed like providence. Established Montana rancher seeks bride of good character. Must be hard-working, capable of managing household affairs, and of childbearing age. Will pay passage for suitable candidate. James Miller had selected her from among 12 respondents. His letters had revealed a practical man focused on building his legacy in this new territory. He had written of his substantial ranch, his position on the town council, and his desire for a sensible wife to help establish his household properly. There had been little romance in his correspondence, but Katerina hadn't expected poetry. She sought security, respect, and perhaps in time, affection. The stagecoach rolled to a stop before a wooden building with Silver Creek stage and post painted across its facade. Katerina gathered her handbag and the small leather satchel containing immediate necessities. Her 2 trunks, containing everything she owned in the world, were strapped to the coach's roof. "End of the line, folks," the driver announced, jumping down to open the door. Katerina waited for her fellow passengers, an elderly couple returning from visiting relatives in Denver, to exit first. Then, taking a deep breath for courage, she stepped down into the dusty street, The late summer sun beat down with an intensity she wasn't accustomed to in her homeland. Katerina scanned the small group of people who had gathered to meet the stage, searching for a face that matched the description James had provided. 40 years old, tall, with sandy hair and a mustache. He had not enclosed a photograph, considering it unnecessary. "Miss Petrova?" Katerina turned toward the voice. A man approached, tall as described, well dressed in a tailored suit that set him apart from the more roughly clothed men nearby. His sandy hair was thinning slightly, and his mustache was neatly trimmed. He matched James Miller's description perfectly. "Mr. Miller?" she asked, though she was certain of his identity. "Indeed," he confirmed with a polite nod, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts as his gaze swept over her. "Welcome to Silver Creek." "Thank you," Katerina replied, suddenly aware of her accent, heavier than usual due to her nervousness. "I am very pleased to be meeting you at last." Something flickered across James's face, a momentary tension around his eyes that vanished so quickly she almost thought she had imagined it. "Your journey was comfortable, I trust?" he asked, his tone formal. "As comfortable as such journey can be," Katerina answered honestly. "I am grateful to have arrived safely." James nodded, then gestured to a young boy loitering nearby. "Tommy, fetch Miss Petrova's trunks from the stage and bring them to my wagon." He turned back to Katerina. "I thought perhaps you might appreciate some refreshment before we head to the ranch. The journey must have left you parched." "That would be most welcome." "Thank you," Katerina replied, relieved by his thoughtfulness. James offered his arm, which she took, and led her across the street to a small restaurant attached to the town's hotel. Inside it was cool and relatively quiet, with only a few patrons scattered among the tables. "Mr. Miller." The proprietor hurried forward, wiping his hands on his apron. "Your usual table is ready, sir." James guided Katerina to a corner table, waiting until she was seated before taking his own chair. A waitress quickly brought water and coffee without being asked, clearly familiar with James's preferences. "The special for the lady," James told the waitress, "and my usual." When they were alone, James studied Katerina with greater care, his gaze analytical rather than warm. There was an uncomfortable silence before he spoke again. "Your letters didn't mention how pronounced your accent would be," he remarked. Katerina felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I did write that English is not my first language," she said carefully. "Yes, but I assumed you would be more fluent," he replied, sipping his water. "Your written English was quite good." "My cousin who went to university helped with letters," Katerina admitted. "But I speak English every day for 3 years. I will improve quickly, I think." James's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I see." Seeking to change the subject, Katerina gestured toward the window. "Your letters describe the beauty of Montana Territory, but they hardly did it justice. The landscape is magnificent. It's a land of opportunity." James agreed, his expression brightening with genuine enthusiasm. "Montana will achieve statehood within our lifetime. Those of us here now, building civilization from wilderness, we're laying the foundation for greatness." This was the James she had come to know through his letters. Passionate about his adopted homeland, articulate, forward-thinking. Katerina felt herself relax slightly. Perhaps his initial reserve was simply the awkwardness of their first meeting. "I've been preparing the ranch house for your arrival," he continued. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Wilson, has aired out the east bedroom for you until the wedding." Katerina nodded, taking a sip of water to hide her sudden nervousness at the mention of their impending marriage. "When do you envision the ceremony taking place?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Reverend Shepherd can perform the service this Sunday," James replied matter-of-factly. "I've already spoken with him. Nothing elaborate, of course, but respectable. The ladies of the town have been quite curious about my foreign mail order. A bride The phrase struck Katerina like a physical blow. Mail-order bride, foreign. Was that how he viewed her, how the town viewed her? In her mind, they were two people who had formed a connection through correspondence and decided to build a life together. "I see," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I had thought perhaps we might take some time to become better acquainted in person before proceeding with the wedding." James's eyebrows rose slightly. "You've travelled over 4,000 miles to marry me, Miss Petrova, having second thoughts already." "Not at all," Katerina assured him quickly. "I simply thought my ranch is 12 miles from town." James interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "It would be improper for you to stay there unwed for any significant period. Think of your reputation and—" "Mine, of course," he was right. Katerina knew the social constraints as well as anyone. Still, something in his assumption of control, however reasonable, pricked at her independence. Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. Katerina used the interruption to gather her thoughts. The meal was simple but well prepared: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. She realized suddenly how hungry she was after the long journey. "Tell me, Miss Petrova," James said, after they had eaten in silence for a few minutes, "do you plan to continue with your native customs here in Silver Creek?" The question surprised her. "What do you mean by native customs?" "The foods you prepare, the clothing you wear, the traditions you observe," James clarified. "I notice the unusual embroidery on your dress. Very ethnic." Something cold settled in Katerina's stomach that had nothing to do with the food. "This is traditional Czech embroidery," she said, touching the collar of her dress. "My mother taught me. Each pattern has meaning in my culture." "I see," James replied, his tone measured. "While such skills are admirable, Silver Creek is an American town. As my wife, you would be expected to maintain an American household. Our community values integration, not foreign displays." "Integration does not mean erasing where one comes from," Katerina responded quietly, unable to keep a hint of defiance from her voice. "My culture is part of who I am." "And who you were," James corrected, setting down his fork. "Who you will become as Mrs. James Miller is something quite different." The gap between the James of the letters and the man before her widened with each exchange. Where was the thoughtful correspondent who had written of his admiration for her descriptions of Czech traditions? Who had expressed interest in her family recipes that she had promised to bring with her? "Perhaps," Katerina suggested, struggling to keep her voice level, "we both made assumptions in our correspondence that reality has not borne out." James's jaw tightened. He glanced around the restaurant, suddenly aware that their increasingly tense conversation had drawn a few curious glances. "Let's continue this discussion more privately," he said, his voice lowered. "My wagon is outside. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Katerina nodded, her appetite gone. James paid for their meal, and they walked in silence to where his wagon waited. The boy, Tommy, had loaded her trunks into the back. James helped her up to the seat with cool politeness, then took his place beside her. They rode in uncomfortable silence through town, past curious onlookers who clearly recognized James and were eager for a glimpse of his foreign bride. Only when they had left the town behind and were traveling the open road toward his ranch did James speak again. "Silver Creek is a young community," he said, his tone somewhat less rigid than before. "Many of the families have been here less than a decade. We're building something important, a proper American town with proper American values." Katerina gazed at the endless prairie surrounding them, so different from the forested landscapes of her homeland. "It is very beautiful country," she offered, trying to find neutral ground. 25,000 acres, James replied, with undisguised pride. I arrived with nothing but determination 15 years ago. Now the Miller Ranch is one of the most successful operations in the territory." Despite her disappointment in their earlier conversation, Katerina couldn't help but admire his accomplishment. "You have built much from nothing. That takes great strength." James seemed pleased by her acknowledgement. "It takes discipline and conformity to the ways that work. That's what many immigrants fail to understand. The old country ways must be left behind for America to forge ahead." The spark of connection Katerina had felt faded. "My grandmother would say, 'New branches cannot grow if you cut away the roots.'" James's hands tightened on the reins. "Your grandmother wasn't building a future in Montana territory." They lapsed into silence again as the wagon continued across the vast landscape. After an hour, they crested a hill, and James's ranch came into view below, a sprawling complex of buildings, centered around a large two-story house built of sturdy timber. Outbuildings, corrals, barns, and bunkhouses spread across well-maintained grounds. In other circumstances, the sight would have filled Katerina with joy. Now it represented everything she had journeyed so far to find, only to discover it might demand the surrender of essential parts of herself. As they pulled up to the main house, a woman emerged onto the porch, gray-haired, thin, with an expression of keen interest as she spotted Katerina. "Mrs. Wilson, my housekeeper," James explained before calling out, "Mrs. Wilson, we've returned with Miss Petrova." The housekeeper nodded in acknowledgement. "Welcome to Miller Ranch, Miss Petrova. I've prepared everything as Mr. Miller instructed." "Thank you," Katerina replied, gratitude in her voice despite her uncertainty about the situation. James set the brake and jumped down from the wagon, this time offering assistance as Katerina descended. "Mrs. Wilson will show you to your room. I imagine you'd like to rest and refresh yourself after your journey. We dine at 6. Without waiting for her response, he strode off toward one of the outbuildings where several ranch hands were gathered, leaving Katerina standing with the housekeeper. "This way, miss," Mrs. Wilson directed, leading her up the steps and into the house. The interior was more impressive than Katerina had anticipated. The entryway opened to a spacious living area furnished with solid, well-crafted pieces. Heavy curtains framed large windows, and a stone fireplace dominated one wall. Everything spoke of prosperity and permanence. "Mr. Miller has done well for himself," Mrs. Wilson remarked, noticing Katerina's admiring gaze. "Built most of this with his own hands when he first settled here," added on as the ranch prospered. "It is a very fine home," Katerina agreed. Mrs. Wilson led her up a wide staircase to the second floor. "The east bedroom will be yours until the wedding. It has its own washroom. Mr. Miller had indoor plumbing installed last year, quite modern. The said bedroom was spacious and well-appointed, with a four-poster bed, a dresser with mirror, a washstand, and a small writing desk positioned before a window that overlooked the ranch's eastern pastures. In the distance, mountains rose against the afternoon sky. "I'll have hot water sent up for washing," Mrs. Wilson said. "Your trunks will be brought up shortly." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson," Katerina replied, sinking onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events and revelations. The housekeeper hesitated in the doorway, studying Katerina with undisguised curiosity. "If you don't mind my asking, miss, where exactly do you hail from?" Mr. Miller didn't share many details, just that he'd arranged for a bride from Europe. "I am from village near Prague in Bohemia, what some now call Czech lands," Katerina explained. "Part of Austrian Empire." Mrs. Wilson nodded, though her expression suggested the information meant little to her. "I see. Well, we don't get many Europeans this far west, mostly Americans pushing westward, looking for fresh opportunities." "America is land of opportunity," Katerina said, repeating what she'd been told countless times since considering emigration. "For those willing to work hard." That it is, Mrs. Wilson agreed, though it demands more than just hard work. Adaptation is essential. She paused, then added with surprising gentleness, Mr. Miller has particular ideas about how things should be done. He's not an unkind man, but he values order and sameness. Katerina understood the warning beneath the housekeeper's careful words. I see. Left alone, Katerina methodically unpacked her travel essentials and washed away the dust of her journey. From her handbag, she removed a small wooden figurine, a hand-carved horse no bigger than her palm, made by her father years ago. She placed it on the bedside table, a small piece of home in this foreign setting, as she changed into a clean dress, simpler than the one she had worn to meet James, with only minimal embroidery at the cuffs. Katerina considered her situation with clear-eyed assessment. She had come too far to turn back. Even if she wished to return to her village, she had sold her parents' small house to pay for part of her journey. There was nothing left for her there. Her options were to adapt to James Miller's expectations or to find an alternative in this vast, unfamiliar country. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. A young girl, no more than 14, entered with a pitcher of hot water. Mrs. Wilson sent this up, miss, she said, carefully carrying it to the washstand. I'm Sarah, the kitchen helper. Thank you, Sarah, Katerina replied with a smile. The girl's eyes widened slightly at her accent. You really are foreign, Sarah blurted out, then immediately flushed with embarrassment. I'm sorry, miss, that was rude. It is truth, not rudeness, Katerina assured her. I am from Bohemia, very far from here. Sarah's embarrassment gave way to curiosity. Is it very different there, from Montana, I mean? Very different, Katerina confirmed. More trees, less sky. Villages centuries old, not new like Silver Creek. It sounds wonderful, Sarah said with the yearning of someone who had never traveled beyond the nearby settlements. Do you miss it terribly? The simple question pierced Katerina's practiced composure. Yes, she admitted softly. But life moves forward, not backward. We must make new home where we find ourselves, Sarah nodded solemnly. Mrs. Wilson says dinner will be ready at 6 sharp. Mr. Miller doesn't tolerate tardiness. She headed for the door, then paused. Your dress is real pretty, miss. I've never seen stitching like that before. After the girl departed, Katerina opened her leather journal, turning to the blank pages at the back. In Czech, she began recording her impressions of Silver Creek, the ranch, and most importantly, James Miller, so different in person from the man she had imagined through his letters. The James of the correspondence had seemed interested in her background, asking questions about her homeland and culture. The man she had met today seemed determined to erase those very aspects of her identity. Had she misunderstood his letters? Or had he perhaps been more focused on acquiring a hard-working wife than on who she actually was? At precisely 5 minutes before 6, Katerina made her way downstairs, following the aroma of cooking food to the dining room. James was already seated at the head of a large oak table that could easily accommodate 12. He stood when she entered, gesture automatically correct even if his expression remained reserved. Miss Petrova, I trust you've had time to rest? Yes, thank you, she replied, taking the seat he indicated to his right. Your home is very beautiful. It's taken years of dedicated effort, James said, a hint of warmth entering his voice as he gazed around the well-appointed room. When I first arrived, I lived in a one-room cabin while building the main house. Each year I've added improvements. Mrs. Wilson entered with a tureen of soup, followed by Sarah carrying a basket of bread. The meal was simple but abundant. Vegetable, soup, roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread with butter. Katerina noted that while the ingredients were familiar, the preparation was different from the Czech cooking she was accustomed to. Less spice, fewer herbs, the flavors more straightforward. The meal is very good, she offered politely. James nodded, Mrs. Wilson is an excellent cook, though her repertoire is somewhat limited to American standards. I understand European cooking can be rather elaborate. Katerina saw an opportunity to find common ground. I brought many recipes from home. Perhaps Mrs. Wilson would not mind if I prepared traditional Czech meals someday. My mother was known for her cooking. A flicker of discomfort crossed James's face. I'm not sure the ranch hands would appreciate foreign food. Americans tend to prefer what they're familiar with. Not all Americans, Mr. Miller, came a new voice from the doorway. Some of us appreciate the wider world and all it has to offer. Katerina turned to see a man standing in the entrance to the dining room, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and striking blue eyes. Unlike James's formal attire, he was dressed in practical ranch clothes, though there was nothing common about his bearing or the intelligence in his gaze. James's expression tightened with obvious displeasure. Thornton, I wasn't expecting you this evening. The newcomer removed his hat as he stepped fully into the dining room, revealing thick, dark hair with a slight wave. His movements carried the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. Forgive the interruption, he said, addressing James while his gaze briefly flickered to Katerina with undisguised interest. There's a problem with the north fence line. Your foreman mentioned you wanted to know immediately about any issues there. James stood, his dinner apparently forgotten. What kind of problem? Looks like someone's been cutting the wire. Found tracks leading back toward Blackwater Canyon. James's expression darkened. Rustlers again. I was afraid of this. He turned to Katerina with a curt nod. Please excuse me, Miss Petrova. This requires my immediate attention. Of course, she replied, though she felt strangely reluctant to be left alone with this stranger whose presence seemed to agitate James so visibly. As James moved toward the door, he paused beside the other man. Thornton, you'll see yourself out once you've delivered your message. The man, Thornton, smiled faintly. Actually, Mrs. Wilson invited me to stay for dinner when I arrived. Said there was plenty, what with your guest being newly arrived, and all. He turned to Katerina and gave a slight bow. Michael Thornton, ma'am. I own the neighboring ranch to the west. Before James could object, Mrs. Wilson appeared from the kitchen. I did invite Mr. Thornton to stay, sir. Seemed the hospitable thing, him riding all this way to bring news. James's jaw worked briefly before he mastered his expression. Very well. Please entertain our guest until I return. I shouldn't be long. With one last warning glance at Thornton, he strode from the room. Mrs. Wilson returned to the kitchen, leaving Katerina alone with the neighbor. He remained standing until she gestured to the chair across from her. Please sit, Mr. Thornton. The food will get cold. Thank you, miss. He settled into the chair with natural grace that contrasted with James's more studied formality. Petrova. Katerina Petrova. Czech, if I'm not mistaken, he asked, serving himself from the dishes on the table. Katerina couldn't hide her surprise. Yes. How did you know? Michael Thornton's smile revealed a small dimple in his left cheek. The embroidery on your cuffs. My father had business dealings with merchants from Prague. I remember similar patterns on the clothing of their wives and daughters. You have good eye for detail, Katerina remarked, impressed by his knowledge. Few Americans she had encountered could distinguish between different European cultures, let alone recognize Czech embroidery patterns. I try to pay attention to the world around me, he replied, breaking a piece of bread. Too many folks out. Here see only what they expect to see, missing the richness of what's actually before them. Something in his tone suggested he wasn't speaking only of embroidery patterns. Katerina studied him more carefully. He appeared to be in his early 30s, perhaps 5 or 6 years younger than James. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with small lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. Unlike James's, carefully maintained appearance. Michael had the rugged look of someone who worked alongside his men, rather than merely directing them. "You said you own neighboring ranch?" she asked, curious about this man who seemed so different from her intended husband. "The Crosswind Ranch," he confirmed. "Not as large as Miller's spread, but respectable enough. Been building it up for 7 years now." "You came west to seek fortune, like Mr. Miller?" Michael's expression grew thoughtful. "Not exactly. I was raised back east, Massachusetts. After Harvard, I spent 3 years traveling through Europe and Asia, while my classmates were settling into banking careers in Boston." A self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "My father called it wanderlust unbefitting a Thornton. When I finally returned to America, I couldn't stomach the confinement of city life. The territories offered space to breathe." "Harvard University," Katerina echoed, impressed. "You are educated, man." "Educated in some ways," he acknowledged, "ignorant in others. My years traveling taught me more than any classroom. Met people from dozens of countries, tried foods I couldn't pronounce, heard music I'd never imagined." His eyes met hers directly. "Made me realize how narrow my Boston upbringing had been." The conversation felt dangerous somehow, too personal for a first meeting, yet Katerina found herself drawn to his worldly perspective after James's rigid provincialism. "And what brings you to Montana, Miss Petrova?" Michael asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Katerina hesitated, unsure how to describe her arrangement with James to his neighbor. "Mr. Miller and I have corresponded. He arranged my passage from Bohemia." Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes. "Ah, a mail-order bride situation." She winced slightly at the phrase. "I prefer to think of it as a practical arrangement between two people seeking companionship." "Of course," he agreed smoothly. "Forgive my bluntness. It's a common enough practice out here where women are scarce, though usually—" He trailed off, seemingly thinking better of whatever he had been about to say. "Usually what, Mr. Thornton?" Katerina prompted. He studied her for a moment before responding. "Usually the brides come from the eastern states, not across an ocean. James Miller has always struck me as someone who prefers sameness, predictability." "And you prefer difference?" she asked before she could stop herself. A genuine smile spread across his face. "I find difference fascinating. The world would be unbearably dull if we were all the same, don't you think?" Before Katerina could respond, Mrs. Wilson returned with a berry pie for dessert, accompanied by Sarah, who cleared the dinner plates. "How are you finding Montana compared to your homeland, Miss Petrova?" Michael asked, as Mrs. Wilson served the pie. "It is very beautiful, but very different," Katerina replied, aware of the housekeeper listening with interest. "More open space here. In my village, forest surrounds us, mountains close by. Here the sky seems endless." "Many newcomers find it overwhelming," Michael observed. "That much openness can make a person feel exposed, vulnerable, or free," Katerina countered softly. Something flickered in Michael's eyes. Approval, perhaps, or recognition. Indeed, though freedom often comes with its own challenges. Mrs. Wilson, who had been following their exchange with unconcealed curiosity, interjected, "Mr. Thornton spent years traveling abroad before settling here, speaks 3 or 4 languages, if rumors are true." 4 poorly, 2 passably, Michael corrected with good humor. "My check is limited to please, thank you, and ordering beer. Prosím, děkuji, a pivo, prosím," Katerina supplied with a small smile. "Exactly," he replied, his pronunciation surprisingly accurate for an American, "though I'm told my accent is atrocious." "Not so bad," Katerina assured him. finding herself relaxing in his presence. Many Americans cannot make our sounds at all. Fi. Conversation flowed easily between them as they enjoyed their dessert, touching on Czech traditions, the differences between European and American customs, and the challenges of adapting to life in Montana territory. Unlike James, who had seemed uncomfortable with any mention of her background, Michael asked thoughtful questions about her homeland and culture. "Your nation has a rich musical tradition, doesn't it?" he asked. "I attended a concert in Vienna. Once a Czech composer, Dvořák, I believe. Extraordinary music." "Antonín Dvořák," Katerina confirmed, delighted to hear a familiar name. "He captures spirit of our folk music in his compositions." She hesitated, then added, "I brought small violin with me. Music reminds me of home." Michael's expression brightened. "You play? I'd love to hear—" He was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Heavy footsteps in the hallway announced James's return. He appeared in the dining room doorway, his expression tightening when he saw Michael and Katerina engaged in animated conversation over dessert. "The fence was indeed cut," James announced, his tone clipped. "We've repaired it for now, but I've set men to patrol that section." "Rustlers are getting bolder," Michael observed, rising from his chair. "My men have spotted unfamiliar riders near Blackwater Canyon 3 times this month. Perhaps if you spent more time securing your boundaries and less time dining at your neighbors' tables, the problem might be contained," James replied coolly. Michael appeared unperturbed by the "Bob." "Perhaps, though I've always found that neighbors fare better working together against common threats rather than in isolation." He turned to Katerina with a warm smile. "Miss Petrova, it's been a genuine pleasure. I hope you'll find happiness in your new home." "Thank you for interesting conversation, Mr. Thornton," she replied, acutely aware of James's disapproving gaze. Michael retrieved his hat from the sideboard and nodded to James. "Miller, thank you for your hospitality, such as it was. I'll see myself out." After he departed, silence hung heavily in the dining room. James took his seat at the head of the table, serving himself a slice of pie that he barely touched. "I apologize for leaving you alone with Thornton," he said finally. "Had I known Mrs. Wilson would invite him to stay, I would have made alternative arrangements." "There is no need for apology," Katerina assured him. Mr. Thornton was perfectly polite company. James's mouth thinned. Thornton cultivates an appearance of cosmopolitan sophistication that many find appealing. Don't be fooled. His foreign ideas about ranching and social conventions have caused nothing but trouble since he arrived in Silver Creek. Katerina absorbed this information, wondering at the obvious tension between the two men. "He mentioned attending Harvard University. He seems well educated." "Education without practical application is worthless," James dismissed. "Thornton spent years wandering through exotic locales, while men like me were building something substantial. Now he's introduced foreign grasses to his pastures, hired Mexican vaqueros instead of good American cowboys, and challenges every tradition that served this territory well." The criticism sounded more like jealousy than legitimate grievance to Katerina's ears. "Innovation can sometimes bring improvement," she ventured cautiously. James studied her with narrowed eyes. "I see Thornton has already influenced your thinking. This is precisely why I prefer to keep my distance from the man. His charm masks a dangerous disregard for established ways." Sensing that further discussion would only heighten tensions, Katerina changed the subject. "The fence line. Will there be trouble with rustlers?" The diversion worked. James launched into an explanation of the ongoing problems with cattle thieves in the region, the inadequate response from the territorial authorities, and his own security measures. The subject carried them through the remainder of the meal, though Katerina found her thoughts repeatedly drifting to her conversation with Michael Thornton. Later, alone in her room, Katerina opened her journal again, adding notes about the unexpected dinner guest. Michael Thornton represented something she hadn't expected to find in Silver Creek, a worldly perspective that valued difference rather than fearing it. His interest in her background had been genuine, his knowledge of European cultures surprising in this remote setting. The contrast between the two neighbors could hardly have been more striking. Where James saw her Czech heritage as something to be erased, Michael had treated it as something to be appreciated. Where James insisted on rigid adherence to American ways, Michael seemed to embrace a broader, more inclusive vision of what America could be. As Katerina prepared for bed, she caught herself humming a Czech folk melody, one her mother had often sung while working in their small kitchen back home. For the first time since arriving at the Miller Ranch, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps she might find a place in this new country without sacrificing essential parts of herself. That hope, however, was tempered by the reality of her situation. In 3 days, she was expected to marry James Miller, a man whose vision for their future seemed to have no room for the cultural heritage that shaped her identity. The question that troubled her as she drifted toward sleep was whether she could truly build a life with someone who wanted her to forget where she came from, or if there might be another path forward in this vast, unfamiliar land. The next morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the east-facing windows of Katerina's room. She rose early, having slept fitfully, her dreams filled with fragments of her village, interspersed with images of endless Montana prairies. The contrast between her past and possible future had never felt more stark. After dressing in a simple work dress, practical cotton, with only the most minimal embroidery at the collar, she made her way downstairs. The house was already active, with Mrs. Wilson directing Sarah in breakfast preparations and ranch hands, coming and going through the kitchen's rear entrance, collecting coffee and biscuits before heading out to their morning tasks. "Good morning, Miss Petrova," Mrs. Wilson greeted her. "You're an early riser. That'll serve you well on a ranch." "In my village, we say, 'Morning hour has gold in its mouth,'" Katerina replied, using a Czech proverb her grandmother had often repeated. Mrs. Wilson nodded approvingly. "Sensible saying, no matter where it comes from. Mr. Miller's already gone out to the north pasture with the men, said to tell you he'd return by midday to take you into town for wedding preparations." Wedding preparations. The words settled heavily in Katerina's stomach. Sunday was only 2 days away. "Is there something I might do to help?" she asked, preferring activity to dwelling on her uncertain future. "Well, if you're offering—" Mrs. Wilson gestured toward a basket of vegetables. "Those need preparing. For tonight's stew." Katerina rolled up her sleeves and set to work cleaning and cutting the vegetables, finding comfort in the familiar task. In the Czech village where she'd grown up, women often gathered to prepare food together, turning necessity into social occasion with songs and stories. The kitchen had been the heart of her childhood home, where her mother had taught her both cooking and the cultural traditions embedded in every recipe. As she worked, she hummed softly, a harvest song from her homeland, its melody evoking memories of autumn gatherings and community celebrations. "That's real pretty," Sarah commented, pausing in her bread kneading to listen. "What is it?" "Song from my country," Katerina explained, "about harvest time, when whole village works together to bring in crops before winter comes." "Does it have words?" the girl asked curiously. Katerina smiled and began to sing softly in Czech, the familiar lyrics bringing unexpected comfort. She translated a verse for Sarah, explaining how the song described the rhythm of scythes cutting wheat and the women binding sheaves, everyone working from sunrise to sunset, then celebrating with feast and dance. Mrs. Wilson listened from her place by the stove, her expression unreadable. When Katerina finished, the housekeeper remarked, "You have a lovely voice. Do you know any American songs?" Few that I learned on ship coming here, Katerina admitted. Perhaps you could teach me some? An unexpected gleam appeared in Mrs. Wilson's eyes. I was quite the singer in my younger days. Know plenty of the old tunes. What began as simple kitchen work transformed into an impromptu cultural exchange, with Mrs. Wilson teaching Katerina an American folk song while Sarah provided enthusiastic, if somewhat off-key accompaniment. In return, Katerina demonstrated a simple Czech folk dance, the three women laughing as they attempted the steps in the confined space of the kitchen. For the first time since her arrival, Katerina felt a genuine connection forming, not through the erasure of her identity, but through the joyful sharing of different traditions. Their pleasant morning was interrupted by a sharp knock at the kitchen door. Sarah opened it to reveal an older ranch hand, hat in hand, looking apologetic for the intrusion. "Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Miller sent me to fetch the Czech lady. Wants her at the north pasture right away." Concern immediately flashed through Katerina. "Is something wrong?" The ranch hand shrugged. "Just said to bring you. Got a buggy waiting outside." Katerina quickly dried her hands and grabbed her shawl from a hook by the door. "I will return soon," she told Mrs. Wilson, who nodded with a worried frown. The drive to the north pasture took nearly 20 minutes, with the ranch hand, who introduced himself as Frank, providing little conversation beyond basic directions. When they reached a fork in the path, eventually they crested a low hill, revealing a scene of activity below. Several men on horseback were grouped around what appeared to be a small makeshift camp. James stood among them, his posture rigid with obvious tension. As the buggy approached, Katerina saw the source of the commotion. 3 men seated on the ground, their hands bound behind them, guarded by armed ranch hands. Near them, several horses were tethered to a picket line. Frank helped her down from the buggy, and James strode over to meet them, his expression thunderous. "Miss Petrova," he said curtly, "I need you to speak with these men." "Me?" Katerina asked, confused. "Why?" "Because they're claiming to be Czech immigrants, but I suspect they're the rustlers who've been troubling the territory. None of my men can understand a word they're saying." He gestured toward the bound men. "If they're really your countrymen, perhaps you can translate. If they're merely pretending to be foreign to avoid answering questions, you'll expose their deception." Katerina looked past James to study the captives more carefully. They appeared exhausted and frightened, 3 men of varying ages, their clothes travel-worn but not disreputable. The oldest, a grey-bearded man of perhaps 60, met her gaze with weary dignity. "I will speak with them," she agreed, moving past James toward the men. As she approached, the oldest man straightened slightly. She addressed him in Czech, asking who they were and what they were doing on Miller Ranch land. The relief on his face was immediate and profound. "Thanks be to God," he replied in their shared language. "Someone who understands. We are lost, miss, traveling to join our relatives in a settlement called New Prague, some 50 miles north of here. Our map was poor, and we became disoriented 3 days ago." Katerina listened as he explained their situation. They were indeed Czech immigrants. Joseph Novak and his son Pavel had sold their small farm near Pilsen after receiving letters from Joseph's brother, who had established himself in the New Prague settlement 2 years earlier. They had traveled with Martin, Joseph's nephew, a blacksmith by trade, who hoped to establish a shop in the growing Czech community. "We meant no trespass," Joseph insisted. "We were simply trying to find the correct road north when this man's cowboys surrounded us at dawn, accused us of being thieves and bound us like criminals." Katerina turned back to James, who had been watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. "They are indeed Czech," she confirmed. "They became lost while traveling to join family in New Prague settlement. They are not rustlers." James's expression hardened. "Convenient explanation. They were found near where my fence was cut, with tools that could have done the damage." They have blacksmith tools because the young one is blacksmith by trade, Katerina explained, gesturing toward Martin. They seek to join Czech settlement. They have papers, if you would let them show you. Papers can be forged, James countered dismissively. The territorial government is sending a marshal next week to deal with the rustling problem. These men, and can explain themselves to him. Horror washed over Katerina. You would keep them bound for days. They have done nothing wrong. That's not yet established, James replied coldly. My responsibility is to protect my property and livestock. Katerina stared at him, seeing for the first time the full extent of his rigidity. At least untie them. Let them have water and food. They are not animals. They'll be given what they need to survive until the marshal arrives, James said, unmoved by her plea. Nothing more. She switched back to Czech, explaining to the men what was happening. Joseph's weathered face fell at the news, but he maintained his dignity. Tell him we understand his concern for his property, the older man said, but ask if he might at least allow my son Pavel to continue to New Prague to inform my brother of our delay. Otherwise, they will fear we have died on the journey. Katerina relayed this request to James, who shook his head firmly. No one leaves until the marshal arrives, he insisted. I'm not separating potential accomplices. Anger flared in Katerina, hot and unexpected. These are my countrymen, innocent travelers who made mistake. Your suspicion blinds you to their humanity, and your shared background blinds you to the possibility of their guilt, James retorted. This is precisely why foreign entanglements complicate matters, divided loyalties, emotional decisions rather than rational ones. This is not about loyalty, Katerina argued. It is about justice, about not condemning men without proof of wrongdoing. James studied her, his expression cooling further. I brought you here to translate, Miss Petrova, not to question my judgment on my own land. If you cannot fulfill that simple function without adding your foreign notions of justice, perhaps you should return to the house. The dismissal stung. But Katerina stood her ground. I will stay with them. They need someone who speaks their language. As you wish, James replied stiffly. Frank will remain to ensure there are no misunderstandings. He turned away to confer with his foreman, effectively dismissing her from his consideration. Katerina returned to the Czech travelers, settling on the ground near them, despite Frank's disapproving frown. For the next few hours, she provided what comfort she could, translating their needs to the ranch hands, sharing news from their homeland, and offering reassurance that the situation would eventually be resolved. Josef told her more about New Prague, describing the growing community of Czech immigrants who maintained their traditions while adapting to American life. We do not reject this new country, he explained. We embrace it, but we bring our music, our crafts, our cooking, the best parts of our heritage to enrich our new home. The vision he described, integration without erasure, resonated deeply with Katerina. It was the balance she had hoped to find, so different from James's insistence on complete assimilation. As midday approached, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching rapidly from the west. Katerina recognized Michael Thornton's broad-shouldered silhouette even before he came close enough to distinguish his features. He reined in his horse sharply as he reached the gathering, his gaze taking in the bound men, the armed ranch hands, and Katerina sitting amidst the captives. "What's happening here, Miller?" he called, dismounting in one fluid motion. James stepped forward, his posture defensive. "Caught some rustlers near the cut fence. Check, according to Miss Petrova, claiming to be lost travelers." Michael's piercing gaze shifted to Katerina. "And do you believe them, Miss Petrova?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "They have done nothing wrong. They seek only to reach their family in New Prague settlement." Michael turned back to James. "New Prague is a legitimate settlement, Miller. Growing community about 2 days. Ride north. Mostly Czech and Slovak immigrants from what I've heard, hard-working farmers and tradesmen. Their existence doesn't prove these men's innocence, James maintained stubbornly. No, but it supports their story, Michael countered. He approached the bound men, stopping before Joseph. To Katerina's astonishment, he addressed the older man. In halting but understandable Czech, I am Michael Thornton. You seek New Prague? Joseph's eyes widened with surprise and hope. Yes, sir. My brother Jan Novak lives there. We are lost, not thieves. Michael nodded, then switched back to English, addressing James. I believe them, and I'm willing to take responsibility for them until the marshal arrives, if that would ease your concerns. The unexpected offer hung in the air between the two men, a challenge as much as a solution. Katerina held her breath, watching the muscle work in James's jaw as he considered the proposal. You'd harbor potential criminals on your property? James finally asked, breaking the tense silence. Michael remained unruffled. I'd extend hospitality to travelers in need, while proper authorities determine the truth, as neighbors should. And if they prove to be the rustlers who've been plaguing our ranges, James pressed, then I'll personally deliver them to the marshal. Michael replied evenly, but I think we both know that's unlikely. James glanced at the bound men, then at Katerina, his expression hardening as he noted her obvious sympathy for her countrymen. You seem very confident in your assessment, Thornton. Based on what? A few words in broken Czech and Miss Petrova's emotional reaction? Based on experience and instinct, Michael countered. These men don't fit the pattern of the rustlers who've been working this territory. Wrong number, wrong equipment, wrong approach. He gestured toward the travelers' worn belongings. Professional thieves don't travel with family photographs and heirlooms. Katerina watched the exchange with growing tension. The contrast between the two men had never been clearer. James rigid in his suspicion of anything foreign or unexpected. Michael flexible and willing to consider alternate explanations. After a long moment, James gave a curt nod. Take them then, but I'll inform the marshal where they can be found when he arrives. Fair enough, Michael agreed. He turned to Katerina, his expression softening. Would you mind explaining to them what's happening? They'll likely trust the news more coming from you. Katerina quickly told Joseph and the others that Michael was offering them shelter at his ranch until the marshal could verify their story. The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. God bless you both, Joseph said, his weathered face, expressing gratitude that transcended language barriers. As James's men untied the Czech travelers, Michael approached Katerina, speaking quietly. Will you come with us to translate? At least until they're settled. I can have you back to Miller Ranch by evening. Before she could respond, James intervened. Miss Petrova has preparations for our Sunday wedding. She won't be accompanying. You, Katerina felt a flash of frustration at having her choice made for her. These men need someone who speaks their language, she said firmly. I should help them. Your obligation is here, James insisted, his tone brooking no argument. Your countrymen will manage. Michael watched this exchange with a thoughtful expression. The decision should be Miss Petrova's, he suggested carefully. Miss Petrova is under my protection and soon to be my wife, James replied coldly. Her loyalties should be clear. The word loyalties struck Katerina like a physical blow. Was that how James viewed her concern for these innocent travelers, as disloyalty to him? The implication that she must choose between compassion for her countrymen and duty to her future husband crystallized something that had been troubling her since her arrival. I will return by evening, she said with quiet determination. But I will help these men now. James's expression hardened into something close to contempt. I see. Well, your choice is illuminating, Miss Petrova. He turned to Frank. Escort Miss Petrova back to the house to collect any belongings she wishes to take with her. What do you mean? Katerina asked, alarmed by his tone. I mean that your Priorities have been made abundantly clear, James replied. I require a wife whose first allegiance is to me and to the American way of life I've built, not someone who rushes to the side of every foreign vagrant who crosses our path. These are not vagrants, Katerina protested. They are families seeking better life just as I am. And therein lies our fundamental misunderstanding, James said coldly. I didn't bring you here to continue your Czech life on American soil. I brought you here to become an American wife. You've shown yourself unwilling or unable to make that transformation. The finality in his voice made it clear. James wasn't merely angry. He was ending their arrangement. Katerina felt a bewildering mixture of emotions. Shock, hurt, relief, and beneath it all, a growing sense of liberation. You would break our agreement because I show kindness to travelers in need? She asked, wanting absolute clarity. I'm breaking our agreement because you've demonstrated divided loyalties and stubborn adherence to foreign ways, James corrected. Better to recognize the incompatibility now than after vows are exchanged. Michael, who had been listening to this exchange with increasing concern, stepped forward. Miller, perhaps this decision is premature. Miss Petrova has only just arrived. Cultural adjustments take time. Stay out of this, Thornton, James snapped. Not everyone shares your enthusiasm for foreign influences. Some of us prefer to maintain traditional American values without dilution. Katerina straightened her shoulders, dignity replacing her initial shock. If American values include condemning innocent men without proof and rejecting kindness to strangers, perhaps I have misunderstood. What America means? A murmur ran through the watching ranch hands. James's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, his foreman approached with urgent news about cattle in the east pasture breaking through a fence line. The immediate crisis demanded attention. Forcing James to postpone the confrontation. Frank will take you back to collect your things, he said curtly to Katerina. I expect you'll be gone by the time I return. With that, he mounted his horse and rode off with several hands, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Frank, looking uncomfortable, gestured toward the buggy. Whenever you're ready, miss. Katerina turned to the Czech travelers who had watched. The confrontation with obvious concern, despite not understanding the words. She explained briefly what had happened. Omitting the harshest of James's statements, Joseph shook his head sadly. We did not mean to cause trouble for you, miss. You did not cause this, Katerina assured him. This trouble was already there, waiting to be discovered. Michael approached, his expression troubled. I'm sorry, Miss Petrova. I never intended to create discord between you and Miller. The discord was already present, she replied, echoing what she'd told Joseph. Today merely revealed its depth. She gazed across the rolling grassland toward the Miller Ranch, visible as a distant cluster of buildings. I must collect my belongings. Will you wait? Of course, Michael agreed. We'll proceed slowly toward my ranch. The trail branches about 2 miles east. You can't miss it. The journey back to the ranch house passed in silence, with Frank clearly uncomfortable and Katerina lost in thought. Her brief time in Montana Territory had veered wildly from the future she had imagined while reading James's letters in her village. Yet strangely, she felt more clarity now than she had since arriving. At the house, Mrs. Wilson met her with concerned questions about the commotion at the north pasture. When Katerina explained that she would be leaving permanently, the housekeeper's expression shifted from surprise to resigned understanding. Can't say I'm shocked, Mrs. Wilson admitted as she helped Katerina pack her trunks. Mr. Miller has particular ideas about what he wants, never been one to bend when he's set on something. And I am not one to break completely just to fit someone else's vision, Katerina replied quietly. As she gathered her belongings, Katerina came across her violin case tucked carefully at the bottom of her larger trunk. The small instrument had been her father's, one of the few personal treasures she'd brought from Bohemia. James had frowned slightly when she'd mentioned it during their uncomfortable dinner, his disapproval of ethnic music evident. On impulse, she removed the violin and placed it atop her packed belongings, easily accessible. Perhaps there would be comfort in music during whatever uncertain future awaited her. With her trunks loaded onto the buggy, Katerina took one last look at the imposing ranch house that had so briefly been her almost home. She felt a momentary pang of regret, not for the loss of James himself, but for the security and stability she'd hoped to find as his wife. "What will you do now, miss?" Sarah asked tearfully, having grown attached to Katerina in their short acquaintance. "I will help my countrymen reach their destination," Katerina replied, finding strength in having even this small purpose. "After that, we shall see what Montana offers a woman on her own." Frank drove her to the trail junction, where Michael waited with the Czech travelers. The older ranch hand helped transfer her trunks to Michael's wagon, then departed with a respectful nod, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but unwilling to openly criticize his employer's decision. As they traveled toward the Crosswind ranch, Katerina fell into conversation with Josef and his family, their shared language a comfort amid the day's turmoil. She learned more about New Prague, a growing settlement of nearly 30 Czech and Slovak families who had established farms and businesses while maintaining their cultural traditions. "We have church services in both English and Czech," Joseph explained proudly. "A small school, shops, even a community hall where we hold celebrations with our music and dances. We adapt to America, but we do not forget who we are." The description stirred something in Katerina, a vision of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to consider, a place where she might find balance between old and new, rather than being forced to choose one over the other. Michael, riding alongside the wagon, observed her animated conversation with the travelers. "They're describing New Prague?" he asked during a lull. Katerina nodded. "It sounds like a remarkable place. They maintain their heritage while embracing new country." "America at its best," Michael commented. "A blend of traditions rather than the erasure of difference." He hesitated, then added, "Miller's view isn't the only American perspective, Miss Petrova. Some of us believe the nation's strength comes from its diversity, not despite it." As the afternoon sun began its westward descent, the Crosswind Ranch came into view, smaller than Miller Ranch, but beautifully situated in a valley nestled between rolling hills. The main house was constructed of logs and stone, complementing the natural landscape rather than dominating it. Unlike the rigid symmetry of James's property, Michael's ranch had an organic quality, buildings arranged to suit the contours of the land. Most surprising to Katerina were the workers visible in the pastures and yard, a mix of faces and backgrounds that stood in stark contrast to the uniformly Anglo workforce at Miller Ranch. She recognized Mexican vaqueros by their distinctive riding style, spotted a black man directing operations at a corral, and noted what appeared to be a Native American family repairing a fence line. "Your workers are very diverse," she observed. Michael nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "I hire based on skill and character, not background. Makes for a more interesting dinner conversation, if nothing else." His smile faded slightly. "Not everyone approves of my approach. Miller calls it undermining proper order." "And what do you call it?" Katerina asked. "Common sense," Michael replied simply. "The best person for each job, regardless of where they were born or what language they speak first." As they approached the main house, a woman emerged onto the porch, tall, gray-haired, with striking features that hinted at Native American ancestry. She wore practical work clothes, but carried herself with unmistakable dignity. "That's Martha," Michael explained. "She runs my household with terrifying efficiency. Shoshone on her mother's side, Irish on her father's. Best cook in 3 counties, and tolerates no nonsense from anyone, myself included." Watching Martha direct ranch hands to unload the wagon and care for the horses, Katerina felt another piece of certainty form amid her chaotic day. James Miller's America was one of rigid conformity, suspicious of difference. Michael Thornton's was one of possibility and integration without erasure. The question now was which version she would choose for herself, and whether choice was truly hers to make. Martha welcomed the unexpected group with remarkable composure, her dark eyes taking in the situation with a single sweeping glance. "Guests for dinner, I see," she remarked to Michael, her tone suggesting this was hardly unusual, and some needing more than just a meal by the looks of things. "Joseph and his family were mistaken for rustlers by Miller's men," Michael explained. Briefly, "They're headed for New Prague settlement once the territorial marshal confirms their identity, and Miss Petrova—" He hesitated, glancing at Katerina. "My arrangement with Mr. Miller has ended," Katerina supplied simply, unwilling to delve into details before strangers. If Martha was surprised by this development, she gave no sign of it. "Well then, you'll all need hot meals and proper rest. The men can bunk in the old cabin by the creek. Miss Petrova can have the guest room." She issued these pronouncements with the confidence of someone whose authority in domestic matters was absolute. "Thank you for your kindness," Katerina said, touched by the woman's matter-of-fact acceptance. Martha's expression softened slightly. "This ranch has sheltered all kinds of travelers over the years. Mr. Thornton believes in hospitality without conditions." As evening fell, Katerina found herself seated at Michael's dinner table alongside Joseph and his family, Martha, and several of the ranch's senior workers. The conversation flowed in a mixture of languages, English predominantly, but with Spanish phrases from Miguel, the Mexican foreman, occasional Czech between Katerina and the travelers, and even a few words of Shoshone from Martha. Unlike the tense formality of meals at Miller Ranch, the atmosphere was relaxed and welcoming. After dinner, Joseph brought out a battered harmonica, offering music in gratitude for their host's kindness. The simple folk melody stirred something in Katerina, a connection to home that she had suppressed since arriving in Montana. Impulsively, she went to her trunk and retrieved her violin, returning to join Joseph in a traditional Czech folk tune. Duzi music filled the warm kitchen with haunting beauty. As the last note faded, Katerina looked up to find Michael watching her with undisguised admiration. "That was extraordinary," he said softly. "The melody carries centuries of history in it." "Doesn't it?" Katerina nodded, surprised and pleased by his perception. "My father said our music tells stories words cannot express. The joy, sorrow, hope and resilience of generations." "Will you play more?" Michael asked, and there was genuine eagerness in his request, so different from James's dismissal of her culture's music as primitive noise. For the next hour, Katerina and Joseph alternated between Czech folk songs and American tunes that Martha or Michael suggested. The evening became an unexpected celebration, a cultural exchange that left everyone enriched rather than diminished. Later, alone in the simply furnished but comfortable guest room, Katerina reflected on the day's dramatic turn of events. That morning, she had awakened as James Miller's bride-to-be, her future seemingly secure if constrained. Tonight, she was effectively homeless, her careful plans shattered, yet somehow she felt more hopeful than she had since arriving in America. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Martha holding a steaming cup of tea. "Thought you might need this," the older woman said, offering the cup. "Sleep doesn't come easy after a day like yours." "Thank you," Katerina replied, accepting the tea gratefully. Its fragrance carried unfamiliar herbs, aromatic and soothing. Martha lingered in the doorway, studying Katerina with those perceptive dark eyes. "Miller's a fool," she said abruptly, "rejecting someone because they bring different ways and knowledge. That's not the America worth building." The blunt assessment startled a smile from Katerina. "You speak very directly." "Got no patience for dancing around truth at my age," Martha replied with a slight shrug. "Seen too many people try to cut away parts of themselves to fit someone else's notion of proper. Never ends well." "What happens now?" Katerina asked, the question that had been circling in her mind all evening. "I have no husband, no home, no clear path forward." Martha's expression softened. "You have time to find your way. Mr. Thornton isn't one to rush people out the door when they're in need. Rest, think, decide what you truly want, not what someone else expects of you." After Martha left, Katerina sat by the window, sipping the fragrant tea and gazing out at the Montana night. Stars blazed against the black sky with a brilliance she had never seen in her village, where trees and hills always bounded the horizon. The vastness that had initially overwhelmed her now felt strangely comforting, a landscape of possibilities as wide as the prairie itself. Morning brought practical considerations. Over breakfast, Michael suggested a solution to her immediate situation. "Joseph and his family will remain here until the marshal arrives, likely in 3 or 4 days," he explained. "After that, I've offered to escort them to New Prague. You'd be welcome to travel with us, if that seems a viable direction for you." Katerina considered the offer carefully. "The settlement does sound promising, but I have no connections there, no arranged position. From what Joseph tells me, they're in desperate need of someone to teach both Czech and English to the children," Michael replied. "Many of the adults struggle with English, while their American-born children are losing touch with their heritage, language. Your fluency in both would be invaluable." A teacher? The suggestion resonated unexpectedly. In her village, Katerina had often helped at the small school, assisting younger children with their lessons. It was work she had enjoyed, but never considered as a formal occupation. "Just a possibility to consider," Michael said, careful not to pressure her. "New Prague might offer a compromise, a place where you could be fully American while honoring your Czech roots." The next days fell into a surprisingly comfortable rhythm. Determined not to be merely a passive guest, Katerina insisted on contributing to the household. She helped Martha with cooking, introducing Czech recipes that the older woman adopted. With enthusiasm, particularly a hearty potato soup that became an immediate favorite among the ranch hands. In the evenings, she often joined Michael in his study, a book-lined room that reflected his diverse interests and travels. Their conversations ranged widely from literature to philosophy, agricultural techniques to music. Unlike James, who had viewed her opinions as challenges to his authority, Michael engaged with her thoughts, sometimes disagreeing but always with respect for her perspective. "You've read Emerson?" he asked one evening, spotting her with a volume. "And from his shelf. Only translations before," she admitted. "His ideas about self-reliance appeal to me. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment," Michael quoted. "Seems particularly relevant to your situation." "And yours," Katerina observed. "Your ranch is very different from others in this territory." Michael smiled ruefully. "Hence my somewhat strained relations with neighbors like Miller. Many believe there's only one proper way to run a ranch, one proper way to be American. I find that limiting." On the third day, a message arrived from James Miller, delivered by a stone-faced ranch hand. The brief note formally dissolved their matrimonial arrangement and enclosed bank drafts covering Katerina's return passage to Europe, should she wish to depart America entirely. Very generous, Katerina remarked, trying to mask the hurt beneath a calm exterior. Though she no longer wished to marry James, the cold finality of his rejection stung nonetheless. Michael, who had been nearby when she received the message, watched her reaction carefully. "Are you considering it? Returning to Bohemia?" Katerina refolded the note deliberately before meeting his gaze. "No, there is nothing for me there now. My future lies in America, though perhaps not the version of America Mr. Miller envisioned." Relief flickered across Michael's features, gone so quickly she might have imagined it had she not been studying him just as intently as he studied her. The territorial marshal arrived the following day, a weathered man named Everett with a pragmatic approach to his duties. After verifying Joseph's documents and hearing accounts from all parties, he determined that the Czech travelers were indeed legitimate immigrants bound for New Prague, not the cattle thieves plaguing the region. Rustlers don't typically bring elderly parents and family photographs along for their criminal activities, he observed dryly, echoing Michael's earlier assessment. "You're free to continue your journey, Mr. Novak, though I'd suggest better. Maps in the future." With Joseph and his family cleared of suspicion, preparations began for the journey to New Prague. The settlement lay 3 days' ride north, in a fertile valley that had attracted a growing community of Czech and Slovak immigrants seeking both opportunity and cultural continuity. The evening before their planned departure, Michael sought out Katerina as she stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant orange and purple. "Have you decided?" he asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Will you continue with us to New Prague?" "Yes," she replied, the decision having crystallized in her mind that afternoon. "I would like to see this place where my countrymen are building new lives without abandoning who they are." Michael nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "I think you'll find it interesting. A genuine cultural hybrid, not quite Czech anymore, not fully American yet, but something new and vital." "And after?" Katerina asked, voicing the uncertainty that still lingered. "If I stay there, become teacher, perhaps?" "That's entirely your choice," Michael replied, "though I hope—" He hesitated, choosing his words with unusual care. "I hope you'll consider returning to visit Crosswind Ranch occasionally. Your perspective has been valuable to me." There was something in his tone that suggested more than merely intellectual appreciation, a warmth that hinted at deeper interest. Katerina felt a corresponding warmth rise within her, but tempered it with caution. She had traveled thousands of miles based on one man's letters, only to discover a reality far different from what she had imagined. She would not rush into another attachment without greater certainty. "I would like that," she said simply. "Your ranch has been a place of healing for me." Michael seemed to understand both what she said and what she left unspoken. "Good. There's no hurry to determine your path. The journey to New Prague will give you time to consider possibilities." The next morning dawned clear and cool, ideal for travel. The small caravan assembled in the ranch yard, Joseph and his family in their wagon, Michael and 2 of his hands on horseback, and Katerina riding alongside in a light buggy that Michael had arranged for her comfort. As they set out on the northern trail, Katerina felt a curious mixture of emotions. Apprehension about the unknown future, lingering sadness over the collapse of her carefully laid plans, but above all, a growing sense of autonomy. For the first time since leaving her village, her direction was determined by her own choice, rather than arrangements made by others. The Montana landscape unfolded before them, vast and majestic. Rolling grasslands gave way to scattered woodlands. Streams sparkled in the morning light, and distant mountains provided a constant backdrop of purple majesty. Riding beside her, Michael occasionally pointed out landmarks or wildlife, a soaring eagle, a herd of pronghorn antelope, wildflowers, unique to the region. Unlike James, who had viewed the territory primarily as property to be claimed and controlled, Michael spoke of the land with genuine reverence, noting both its beauty and the responsibility of those who settled it. "My Shoshone friends taught me to see this country differently," he explained. "Not as something to conquer, but as something to live in harmony with. It's changed how I approach ranching entirely." By mid-afternoon, they reached a high ridge overlooking a broad valley. Michael reined in his horse, gesturing for Katerina to stop her buggy beside him. "From here, you can see 3 territories and the futures they represent," he said, pointing to distant horizons. "Behind us, the world Miller is building, prosperous, orderly, but rigid in its definitions. Before us, New Prague and similar settlements, communities seeking to blend old traditions with new opportunities. And beyond," he gestured toward the mountains, "lands still largely unchanged, reminding us that America existed long before any of us claimed to define it." The journey to New Prague continued for 2 more days, following winding trails through increasingly varied terrain. As they traveled, Katerina found herself drawn into lengthy conversations with Michael during the daylight hours, and sharing music and stories with Yosef's family around the campfire each evening. Michael, she discovered, possessed a genuine curiosity about her homeland that went beyond polite interest. He asked thoughtful questions about Czech history, traditions, and language, often connecting her answers to his own experiences in Europe. Unlike James, who had viewed her background as something to be overcome, Michael seemed to consider it a valuable perspective to be understood and appreciated. "Your English improves every day," he remarked on the afternoon of the 3rd day as they rested their horses near a small stream. "I have more practice now," Katerina replied. "At Miller, French, I was often silent, afraid to make mistakes." Michael frowned slightly. "Miller made you feel ashamed of your accent." "Not directly, perhaps," Katerina admitted, but his disapproval was clear. He wanted American wife, who sounded American. "His loss," Michael said simply. "I find your way of speaking quite beautiful." The compliment brought unexpected warmth to her cheeks, and she busied herself adjusting her bonnet to hide her reaction. Their connection was growing undeniably stronger, but Katerina remained cautious. Her heart had been bruised by James's rejection, and she was determined not to rush into another attachment without certainty. By midday of the 3rd day, signs of settlement began to appear. Fenced fields with early crops, scattered farmhouses, and finally, as they crested a small hill, the village of New Prague spread before them in a sheltered valley. Katerina's first impression was of a curious hybrid between old world and new. The buildings were constructed in American frontier style with locally available materials, yet many featured decorative elements reminiscent of Bohemian architecture. Carved wooden details on porches, distinctive window shapes, even a few roof lines that echoed European design. Gardens showed the same blending, with native plants growing alongside herbs and flowers that Czech immigrants had carefully transported across an ocean and continent. As their small caravan approached the center of the settlement, people emerged from homes and businesses, clearly curious about the newcomers. When Joseph called out greetings in Czech, the response was immediate and joyful. Within moments, they were surrounded by excited villagers, many speaking rapidly in Czech as they welcomed the new arrivals. An older man pushed through the crowd, his weathered face transformed by joy as he embraced Joseph. "My brother Jan," Joseph explained to Katerina and Michael, "the one we journeyed so far to join." The reunion was touching to witness. 2 brothers separated for years, now reunited in this distant corner of America. As word spread that Katerina was also Czech, she found herself welcomed with equal warmth, countless hands reaching out in greeting, voices asking about her village, her journey, her impressions of America. "You see," Michael murmured beside her, watching her interaction with the settlers. Here, your background is not a liability, but a bond. A tall man in his 50s approached them, his bearing suggesting authority within the community. Anton Dvorak, he introduced himself in accented but clear English. Mayor of New Prague, we welcome you all, especially our Czech sister. He turned to Michael with obvious recognition. Mr. Thornton, an unexpected pleasure. Your business brings you north again. Just escorting new arrivals, Michael replied, shaking the mayor's hand. And Miss Petrova, who might be interested in your community. Mayor Dvorak's eyebrows rose with interest. Indeed. Are you considering settling here, Miss Petrova? Perhaps, Katerina answered carefully. I am between plans at moment. Mr. Thornton mentioned you might need teacher who speaks both Czech and English. The mayor's face brightened immediately. Heaven sent. Yes, we desperately need someone like you. Our children learn English in mornings. From Mrs. Peterson, American woman from next settlement, but she knows no Czech. Our elders try to teach Czech in afternoons, but they struggle with methods. Someone fluent in both, with teaching experience. He spread his hands expressively. A miracle we have prayed for. I have some experience teaching in my village, Katerina said modestly, though no formal training. Experience matters more than papers here, Mayor Dvorak assured her. Would you consider staying at least long enough to see if the position suits you? We cannot offer grand salary, but provide comfortable living and community support. The offer was unexpected in its immediacy, yet precisely what Michael had suggested might await her in New Prague. Katerina felt a flicker of excitement at the prospect. Meaningful work that valued both sides of her identity rather than forcing her to choose between them. I would like to learn more, she replied carefully. To see the school, meet some families, understand what would be expected. Excellent, the mayor beamed. We have prepared celebration tonight for Joseph's family. Tomorrow I will show you everything. For now, we have arranged accommodations for all our guests. Michael and his men were directed to the small town's only boarding house, while Katerina was invited to stay with the mayor's family. Before they separated, Michael drew her aside briefly. Will you be comfortable here? He asked, genuine concern in his expression. Yes, she assured him. These are my people in way. I will be well cared for. Something flickered across his features, perhaps disappointment that she identified the settlers as her people in a way that excluded him. Of course. I'll see you at the celebration tonight, then. The mayor's home was modest by American standards, but well-built and comfortable. His wife Helena welcomed Katerina with traditional Czech hospitality, immediately offering food and showing her to a small but clean guest room decorated with hand-woven textiles that stirred powerful memories. Of home. You must rest before tonight's gathering, Helena insisted in Czech. Then perhaps change into something festive. The whole town will attend. Left alone, Katerina unpacked her violin and a dress she had brought from Bohemia, deep red with elaborate embroidery around the neckline and cuffs, far more decorative than anything James would have approved. After weeks of subduing her cultural expression, the prospect of wearing it openly among people who would appreciate rather than critique, its significance filled her with quiet joy. The celebration that evening exceeded her expectations. The town's community hall, a large wooden building at the center of the settlement, had been decorated with wreaths of local wildflowers interspersed with embroidered banners. Tables groaned under the weight of food that bridged two worlds, roast, venison and prairie chicken, alongside traditional Czech dumplings, sauerkraut and kolaches. Most striking to Katerina was the music. A small band played instruments that had evidently made the journey from Bohemia, a violin, accordion and clarinet, producing melodies that transported her instantly to village festivals of her childhood. Yet the musicians occasionally incorporated American folk tunes as well, creating a unique blend that represented their evolving identity as Czech Americans. Michael found her shortly after the festivities began, his eyes widening appreciatively at her traditional dress. "You look transformed," he said simply. "This is clothing I brought from home," she explained, smoothing the embroidered fabric. "Too foreign for Mr. Miller's taste." "Miller is a fool," Michael replied with unexpected vehemence. "That dress isn't just beautiful, it's a work of art, each stitch carrying meaning and history." His understanding of what the traditional clothing represented touched her deeply. "You see more than most Americans." "I try to look beyond the surface," he said, his gaze holding hers with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "To understand the true worth of things and people." The evening unfolded in a whirl of music, dance, and conversation. Katerina found herself alternately playing her violin with the local musicians, teaching American guests traditional Czech dance steps, and speaking with community members eager to share their experiences of building new lives while maintaining cultural connections. Through it all, Michael remained a steadfast presence, sometimes at her side, sometimes engaged in conversation with townspeople, but always returning to her orbit like a planet to its sun. She noticed how easily he moved between groups, speaking with Joseph's family in his limited Czech, discussing cattle prices with local farmers, even joining a lively debate about territorial politics with several community leaders. "Your friend, Mr. Thornton, is unusual for an American," Helena remarked in Czech as she and Katerina helped serve desserts. "Most who visit look at us as curiosities, but he speaks to everyone as equals." "He has traveled widely," Katerina explained. "Seen many countries and cultures." Helena's shrewd eyes assessed Katerina carefully. "And his interest in you seems more than friendly, yes? The way he watches when you play music or speak with others." Katerina felt her cheeks warm. "We are merely acquaintances. He has been kind to help me after my arrangement with Mr. Miller ended." Helena replied, clearly unconvinced. "Well, kind men with respect for a woman's mind and heritage are rare treasures, whether as friends or something more." As the celebration continued into the night, Mayor Dvorak called for attention, raising his glass in a toast. "To our new arrivals, Joseph and his family returned to us at last, and to Miss Petrova, who we hope will find her home among us as our much-needed teacher." Cheers erupted, and Katerina found herself at the center of warm attention and hope. The unconditional welcome was overwhelming after James's cold rejection of her heritage. Here, in this small frontier settlement, her Czech background was not a liability, but a valued asset. Later, as the gathering began to disperse, Katerina stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection. The night was clear, stars brilliant above. The settlement, the air carrying the mingled scents of prairie flowers and wood smoke. She felt a curious peace settling over her, not the certainty of having found her final destination, but the comfort of expanded possibilities. "Beautiful night," Michael said quietly, joining her on the porch of the community hall. "Yes," she agreed. "Reminds me of summer evenings in my village when celebrations would continue until dawn." "What do you think of New Prague?" he asked, leaning against a wooden post, his face half illuminated by light spilling from the hall's windows. Katerina considered the question carefully. "It is a remarkable place. Not quite Czech anymore, not fully American yet, as you said, but something new and valuable." "Could you see yourself here, teaching the children, becoming part of this community?" "Perhaps," she replied honestly. "The position they offer would use both sides of who I am. Not force me to choose between them." Michael nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "That's what I hoped you'd find here. a place where integration doesn't require erasure. The insight in his observation struck her anew. How differently he viewed the immigrant experience compared to James, who had demanded complete assimilation at the cost of identity. "The mayor will show me the school tomorrow," she said. "Then I can better judge if I am suited for such responsibility." "I have no doubt you'll excel," Michael replied with quiet confidence. "You have both the knowledge and the heart for teaching." "And after I decide?" Katerina asked, the question that had been circling in her mind throughout the evening. "Will you return to your ranch?" Something flickered in Michael's eyes, a moment of vulnerability quickly masked. "Eventually, yes. I have responsibilities there, but I'm in no particular hurry to leave." The implication hung between them, that his timeline depended, at least in part, on her decisions. The realization both thrilled and frightened her. Their connection had grown rapidly in the days since she had left Miller Ranch, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than the practical arrangement she had established with James. "I would not want to delay your return," she said carefully. "Some journeys are worth taking slowly," Michael replied, his gaze holding hers in the starlight, "especially when the destination remains uncertain." The following morning, Mayor Dvorak proudly showed Katerina the settlement's school, a simple wooden building with large windows that flooded the single classroom with natural light. Though modest by Boston or New York standards, it was well constructed and thoughtfully arranged, with rows of handmade desks, a small blackboard, and shelves containing a limited but carefully selected collection of books in both English and Czech. "We have 28 children of school age," the mayor explained, "from 6 to 15 years. Some of the older boys attend only in winter months when farm work slows." "And what curriculum do you follow?" Katerina asked, examining the worn textbooks. "That is our challenge," he admitted. "Mrs. Peterson teaches basic American subjects, reading, writing, arithmetic in English. Our Czech elders try to maintain language and cultural knowledge, but without proper methods." He spread his hands expressively. "We need someone who understands both worlds, who can help our children become good Americans without forgetting their heritage." As they toured the settlement, Katerina met several families whose children would be her pupils. The parents spoke primarily Czech, with limited English, while their American-born children often showed the reverse pattern, comfortable in English but struggling with their parents' native tongue. The communication gap between generations was widening, creating a cultural divide within families. "You see our difficulty," Mayor Dvorak said as they walked back toward the center of town. "Without someone like you, we fear the younger generation will lose connection to their roots entirely." The responsibility was significant, yet Katerina felt uniquely qualified for such a position. Her own experience straddling two worlds, painfully divisive at Miller Ranch, could become an asset here, helping children navigate the complex identity of being Czech American. "I would need to develop proper teaching plan," she said thoughtfully. "Perhaps combining subjects, teaching American history alongside Czech traditions, mathematics through our traditional folk patterns, natural sciences using examples from both countries." The mayor's face brightened with each suggestion, exactly the approach we have hoped for, but lacked the knowledge to implement. "Miss Petrova, I cannot offer grand salary, but the position includes the small house behind the school, meals provided by community families, and our sincere gratitude." It was a modest offer materially, but rich in other ways: community, purpose, and the opportunity to preserve cultural connections rather than sever them. Yet Katerina hesitated, aware that another possibility had emerged during her time with Michael, one that tugged at her heart in unexpected ways. "I'm honored by your offer," she told the mayor. "May I have today to consider it properly? Such decision should not be made hastily." "Of course," he agreed readily. "Take what time you need. We celebrate Yosef's family again tonight with dancing. Perhaps you will have your answer by then." As they parted, Katerina found herself seeking solitude to sort through her conflicting emotions. She walked to the edge of the settlement, finding a peaceful spot beneath a large cottonwood tree overlooking fields where Czech farming techniques were being adapted to Montana soil. The teaching position offered security and purpose in a community that valued her background. It represented the integration she had hoped for when leaving her village, becoming American. Without erasing her Czech identity, yet something held her back from immediate acceptance. Deep thoughts. Michael's voice interrupted her reflection. He approached from the direction of the boarding house, leading his horse rather than riding. "Important decision to consider," she replied, gesturing for him to join her beneath the tree's spreading branches. "The teaching position?" he asked, tethering his horse before sitting beside her on the grassy slope. Katerina nodded. "Mayor offered it formally this morning. Small house behind school, community support, chance to help children maintain connection to both worlds." "It seems ideal," Michael observed, studying her profile. "Yet you're hesitating." His perception startled her. "How did you know?" "Your expression," he said simply. "I've come to recognize your thoughtful frown when you're weighing options." The simple statement revealed how closely he had observed her in their relatively brief acquaintance, noticing nuances that James had never bothered to perceive despite their months of correspondence. "It is good opportunity," Katerina acknowledged, "to use both my languages, to help bridge cultures rather than choose between them." "But," Michael prompted gently. Katerina hesitated, uncertain how to express the competing possibility that had formed in her mind and heart. "New Prague is not the only place where I have found acceptance," she said finally, meeting his gaze directly. Understanding dawned in Michael's eyes, followed by something that looked remarkably like hope. "Crosswind ranch has been richer for your presence, brief as it's been," he said quietly. "Your home is special place," Katerina continued, choosing her words carefully, "where differences are valued, not merely tolerated, where Martha's Shoshone heritage and Irish humor blend with Miguel's Mexican traditions and your Harvard education." She smiled softly. "A different kind of New Prague, perhaps." Michael's expression intensified. "Katerina," he said, using her first name for the first time, "are you saying you might consider returning to Crosswind rather than staying here?" "I am considering all possibilities," she replied truthfully. "Teaching here would be meaningful, work in welcoming community, but there might be other paths that also honor both sides of who I am." Michael took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I had planned to wait longer before speaking, to give you time to heal from Miller's rejection. But I find I can't leave tomorrow without making my feelings clear." Katerina's heart quickened at his words and the earnest intensity of his expression. "From that first dinner at Miller's table, when you spoke of your homeland with such quiet pride despite his disapproval, I recognized something rare," Michael continued. "A woman of substance and courage, caught between worlds, yet diminished by neither." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sure. "I'm not offering a formal proposal. That would be premature for us both. But I am offering a different kind of possibility. Return to Crosswind Ranch, not as a guest or refugee, but as a partner in building something meaningful." Martha mentioned needing help with the ranch accounts and correspondence. The local children, our workers' families and neighboring homesteads, lack proper education. There's room for your skills, your music, your cultural knowledge. His eyes held hers steadily. "Room for you, Katerina, exactly as you are." The offer touched something deep within her, not just the practical arrangement of position and security, but the emotional recognition of her whole self. Unlike James, who had wanted to remake her in his preferred image, Michael saw value in both her American future and Czech past. "This is unexpected," she said softly. though in truth the connection between them had been building steadily since their first meeting. "For me as well," Michael admitted with a rueful smile. "I didn't ride to Miller's ranch that day, expecting to find someone who would challenge my thinking and capture my interest so completely." "And if I were to accept," Katerina asked, needing absolute clarity, "what would you expect of me?" "Only what you freely choose to give," he replied without hesitation. "Your perspective, your companionship, your help in making Crosswind a place where cultures meet rather than collide." His expression grew more serious. "I'm not offering the conventional security that Miller promised, but rather a partnership built on mutual respect." The distinction was profound. James had offered protection in exchange for conformity. Michael offered collaboration based on valuing their differences. "I need time to think," Katerina said, though her heart was already leaning toward his unexpected proposal. "Of course," Michael agreed immediately. "The journey back to Crosswind will take several days. There's no rush to decide." They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, the Montana breeze rustling through the cottonwood leaves above them. In the distance, the settlement of New Prague continued its daily activities, a testament to the possibility of maintaining cultural identity while embracing American opportunity. "Whatever you decide," Michael said finally, "I want you to know how much I've valued our conversations. You've helped me see my own country through fresh eyes." That evening, the celebration for Joseph's family continued with music and dancing in the community hall. Katerina played her violin alongside the local musicians for several sets, then joined the dancers as Michael led her through both American country dances and the Czech folk steps she had taught him at Crosswind Ranch. As the evening progressed, Mayor Dvorak approached her during a brief respite from the festivities. "Have you had time to consider our offer, Miss Petrova?" Katerina nodded, her decision having crystallized during the hours of reflection following her conversation with Michael. "I have, and I am deeply honored. New Prague is a remarkable community that any Czech person would be proud to join." The mayor's face fell slightly at her phrasing. "But you will not be accepting the position." "Not at this time," she confirmed gently. "Another opportunity has presented itself, one that also allows me to bridge cultures, but in different setting." Understanding dawned in the mayor's eyes as they flickered toward Michael, who was engaged in conversation with several community elders across the room. "Ah, Mr. Thornton has made an offer of his own, I see." "A possibility," Katerina corrected. "Not yet fully determined, but one I wish to explore." To her relief, the mayor showed no resentment. "You must follow your heart in such matters. Though we are disappointed, our community understands choosing one's own path. It is why we all came to America." He smiled, kindly. "And New Prague will always welcome you, should your journey lead back this way." The following morning, Katerina bid farewell to Joseph's family and the welcoming community of New Prague. As she and Michael began their journey south toward Crosswind Ranch, the settlement gradually receded behind them, becoming a small cluster of buildings nestled in the valley below. "Any regrets?" Michael asked, as they paused at the ridge overlooking the panorama. Katerina considered the question seriously. "Not regret exactly. More awareness that life offers many possible paths, each with its own value." "And the path you're choosing now?" Michael's tone was careful, avoiding presumption. "Is one of possibility," she replied, meeting his gaze directly. "Of partnership rather than submission. Of building something that honors both where I come from and where I am going." Michael's smile deepened, reaching his eyes with a warmth that made her heart respond in kind. "That's all I can ask for, the chance to discover whether we might create something meaningful together." As they continued southward, the Montana landscape stretched before them, vast, challenging, but filled with potential. Katerina felt a Profound sense of rightness settled over her. The journey that had begun with James Miller's restrictive vision of what an American wife should be had led her, unexpectedly, to a man who valued her precisely because of her differences, not despite them. 3 months later, Katerina sat on the porch of Crosswind Ranch's main house, a letter from New Prague in her hands. The settlement school had found a teacher, another Czech immigrant with experience in both languages, and the children were thriving. Joseph's family had established themselves successfully, with Pavel apprenticing to the local blacksmith and Martin setting up his own shop. "Good news?" Michael asked, joining her on the porch after a day working with the cattle. "Very good," she confirmed, folding the letter carefully. "The community prospers." "As does ours," Michael observed, gesturing toward the ranch yard where several new structures had risen in recent months, including a small schoolhouse where Katerina now taught the children of ranch workers and neighboring homesteaders 3 days each week. The transition from mail-order bride to independent woman had not been simple. There had been whispers in Silver Creek about her broken engagement to James Miller, speculation about her relationship with Michael, and raised eyebrows at her continued Czech customs and accent. Yet, with each passing week, her confidence had grown, not through abandoning her heritage as James had demanded, but through finding ways to integrate it meaningfully into her new life. The ranch's Sunday dinners now featured Czech dishes alongside American fare. Several ranch hands had learned basic Czech phrases, just as Katerina continued improving her English. Martha had incorporated Bohemian herbs into her remedies, while Katerina had adopted Shoshone patterns into her embroidery. Most significantly, her relationship with Michael had deepened, from tentative possibility to solid partnership. They worked together on ranch accounts, collaborated on agricultural experiments, and spent evenings sharing books and music in the study that had become their mutual domain. "James Miller came by the general store yesterday," Michael mentioned casually, settling into the chair beside hers. "With his new wife from Boston, very proper, very American." "And very rigid, I imagine," Katerina added, remembering James's inflexible standards. "Remarkably so," Michael agreed with a slight smile. "She seemed most uncomfortable when Miguel addressed her in Spanish. James quickly intervened to translate, though she clearly understood." Katerina shook her head, not in judgment, but in recognition of the path not taken. He found exactly what he wanted, someone who fits his vision of proper American wife. "While I found something infinitely more valuable," Michael replied, reaching for her hand. "A partner who brings her whole self to our shared life, enriching it with perspectives I would never have on my own." As the Montana sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues, Katerina reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. She had crossed an ocean seeking security through conformity, only to discover that true belonging came not from erasing differences, but from finding someone who valued them. The night air carried the scent of sage and prairie flowers as Michael drew her gently to her feet. Mrs. Wilson mentioned that several families from town are planning a summer dance next weekend. "Would you bring your violin? There's been a request for both American and Czech music." Katerina smiled, recognizing in this simple request everything she had truly been seeking, not just acceptance of who she was, but celebration of the unique perspective she brought to her adopted homeland. "I would be honored," she replied, her heart full of quiet joy. After all, the best music comes when different traditions blend to create something new, yet honors where each note originated. As they stood together in the fading light, Katerina knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home, not in a place that demanded she become someone else, but with a man who cherished her precisely for being too foreign. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on. Your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.